few ways. I thought you mentioned this.
We still have Annie Morrison on the stand, Judge.
All rise for the jury.
Thank you. All please be seated. All right, now, please.
All right, Ms. Morrison, I think when we took a break for lunch, we were talking about the time that you spent with the defendant here in Houston.
Yes.
And we had talked about the fact that the violence was escalating.
Yes.
I want to make sure that we've covered that. So can you talk to me about, after James was born, how things escalated between you and the defendant?
The physical violence became more often. The fights had continued, the screaming arguments, that was a staple throughout our entire relationship. But the physical violence escalated in terms of how often it was occurring. It was still, could be months between incidents, but having not had physical violence except for that one incident prior in New York, it certainly was an escalation from how often.
At some point, did the two of you leave Houston and move out of state?
Yes.
Where did you go?
We moved to a town near Youngstown, Ohio.
And why did you move to Ohio?
For Leon to take a residency position with a hospital in Youngstown.
Okay, so you mentioned that his residency in New York was not renewed. Y'all moved down here. He attends residency down here.
Yes.
Was that renewed, that contract renewed?
I believe the contract with Baylor was not renewed, but he did do some work with UT Houston and maybe some other institutes while we were down here.
Did he complete his residency while y'all were in Houston?
No.
So in an effort to do that, did y'all move to Ohio?
Yes.
And did you up and leave your job and take a new job in Ohio?
I did leave my job. I took a job in Pittsburgh, which was about 60 miles from where we were living in Ohio.
And who were you working for in Pittsburgh?
I was working for Bayer.
Okay, so did you go in-house then?
Yes, I did.
Okay. While you're living in Pittsburgh, talk to me about your relationship there.
I think at the beginning was very similar to our relationship in Houston. We continued to fight and to argue. That's not to say we didn't have good times. We did. And we had talked about possibly separating because things had deteriorated, decided not to. We wanted to have another child, so we tried to have another child. We had 2 miscarriages in 2011. And got pregnant with our second son in about November of 2011.
Let me stop you right there. So you're commuting to Pittsburgh and back every day?
Yes.
And what is the defendant doing during that time?
He worked until, I believe it was March of 2011. He worked in his residency. He was subsequently fired from that position, and then he did not work after that.
Did he tell you why he was fired?
I can't remember if he told me, but my impression was there were personality conflicts with a number of the people that he worked with, including the director of the residency program. I know there were some exams he had to take that my understanding is he did not do very well on. I don't know if that played into it or not, but that was my impression at the time.
So as far as you know, did he ever complete residency?
No.
You mentioned that he was fired in March. So after March happens, does he get another job?
No.
So what is he doing all day?
I don't know.
Where were you?
Working.
And were you pregnant at the time?
Yes. I was pregnant beginning in early November of 2011.
During that time period, did you become concerned that he was in a relationship with another female?
Yes, I did.
And did you confront him with that?
Yes, I did.
Who did you believe that he was seeing behind your back?
A woman named Patty Gooden.
And when you confronted him with that, did he deny it or did he come forward with it?
He denied it.
Did you know Patty?
Yes, I did.
And did you know Patty's children?
Yes, I did.
And do you remember their names?
Darren and Mackenzie.
And would you all get together for dinner and those kinds of things before you realized what was going on with Patricia and the defendant?
Yes, occasionally we would get together for dinner.
At some point, did you come to learn that the defendant was actually in a relationship with Patty Gooden?
Yes.
And were you pregnant at the time?
Yes, I was.
While you're at work, what kinds of responsibilities does the defendant have around the house?
None. He really wasn't staying at our house. I don't know where he was during the day.
I'm sorry. You mentioned that you were working in Pittsburgh and you don't know what he was doing during the day. Who was bringing in the money?
I was.
Was he working? Did he find a job after he was fired from the program in Pennsylvania?
No.
What kind of behaviors was he exhibiting during that time period that caused you concern?
He wasn't home a lot. He would come home when I brought our older son home from daycare. He would be home, typically would have dinner with us, and then he would leave, and he would be gone again. Sometimes he would come home early in the morning before my son and I left the house, and sometimes he would not. There was an instance where my older son was sick.
Can you tell me about the time your older son was sick? What happened?
We woke up early, maybe about 5:45, and my son had 102 fever, and I couldn't find the children's Advil or Tylenol, and Leon wasn't there, and I called him and essentially said, go get me some medicine and bring it back. And he did. He brought the medicine back in order for me to give it to my son. I believe I was about 7 months pregnant at this time. And then he left again, and I asked him where he was going, and he said that Patty's daughter was having her birthday party that day, and he said he would be there, and he needed to be there.
So at some point, you're pregnant with Cash, you're raising this other baby. Do you become aware that he's actually romantically involved with Patricia Gooden?
Yes.
Talk to me about during that time period when you were pregnant with your younger son. Was he violent with you?
Yes, he was.
Okay, tell me about that.
It was much of the same, pushing, grabbing me. There was one time he pushed my head down onto the counter and bruised my face near my eye.
Okay, let me stop you there. Talk to me about what happened that time.
I don't recall what the fight was about. I recall we were in the kitchen and he pushed my face into the counter. He threatened to punch me in the stomach. He kicked my legs. I remember bringing my legs up as far as I could toward my chest to try to protect my stomach.
So you were pregnant at the time?
Yes.
And you mentioned that he left bruising on your face. So he slammed your face hard enough on that counter that he actually left bruises?
Yes.
Did he ever threaten you?
Yes.
Okay, tell me about that.
He threatened that if I ever left, that he would kill me. He said that nobody would ever find my body because he was a doctor and he had access to chemicals that would dissolve my body. He said if I ever left that he would find me and the children and take my children and I would never see them again.
Did you believe him when he made these threats to you?
Yes.
Were you concerned about the safety of your son?
I was concerned that he would take my son and I would never see him again.
After your second son was born, did the defendant return to your home?
Yes.
And did you make an attempt to reconcile with him?
We separated for a period of time, maybe about 3 weeks. And then he did return home. We made an attempt to reconcile, and that's when we moved to Pittsburgh, partly because he wasn't working and my job was in Pittsburgh, and partly because it gave us distance between he and Patty.
So at that point, was it your understanding that he and Patty Gooden were over?
That was my understanding.
So you mentioned you moved to Pittsburgh. Are you still working during that time period?
Yes.
Is the defendant working during that time period?
No.
Do you know what he was doing while you were working during the day?
I know he was drinking alcohol. He would frequent Rivers Casino in Pittsburgh, and he played a lot of online poker.
Was he spending a lot of money?
Yes,
Whose money was it? Who was bringing in the money?
I was.
When you say he was spending a lot of money, was it on alcohol and gambling?
Yes.
Do you recall about how much he spent gambling at the time?
I don't recall, but it was in the tens of thousands.
Was it that frustrating to you?
Yes,
Why was it frustrating?
because kids are expensive. Life is expensive. That was money that I wanted to save, some of it to save. Some of it was for daycare and food and clothing and rent. And it was all being given to the casinos and online poker. He was buying online poker chips and using the money for online poker as well.
Were your boys in daycare during that time period, or did they stay home with him?
They were in daycare.
How come you didn't just leave them at home with him?
I didn't trust him to take care of them. He was not engaged. He was always either at Rivers or on his phone. And at some point, I became concerned about the alcohol as well and wouldn't allow him to drive the kids anywhere.
So is it fair to say that during that time period, you're working, you're maintaining the house, you're taking care of the kids, and he's kind of off doing his own thing?
Yes.
Did there come a time where, once again, the violence kicked back up while you were in Pittsburgh?
Yes, very shortly after we moved there, the violence continued.
I want to talk to you about a particular instance when James was a baby, and I believe it was your birthday. Talk to me about what happened on your birthday.
Cash was a baby. James was about 3. The boys came in early in the morning on my birthday and climbed into bed. They wanted us to get up. I wanted to sleep in, but we got up, and I was not very happy with Leon about it. And I remember saying to him something about, it's my birthday, and I don't ever get to sleep in. It would be nice if I could sleep in one morning. And he got really angry. He pushed me into our guest room, which was across the hall from our bedroom. And he pushed me onto the bed and was screaming at me about wanting to go back to sleep. And he lifted the mattress while I was on the bed, and essentially I rolled off the bed onto the floor, and he sort of pushed the mattress on top of me. And then he threw a blanket and a pillow and said, "You can sleep there," essentially on the floor. After that, I stayed in the room for a while because I was scared. And after I got up, I realized he had gone back to bed. So,
Unresponsive.
Let me stop you there. So you mentioned he went back to bed. Did he stay in bed for the remainder of the day?
he did.
I want to fast forward a little bit and talk to you about a time when you got upset about some keys, or when the defendant got upset about a set of keys. Talk to me about that.
That was about a week after my birthday, a little less than a week after my birthday. We had gotten in a fight in the morning as I was getting ready and getting the kids ready to go to daycare. He took my keys and my cell phone, and he took the blankets and pillows off our bed, and he laid in front of the front door and wouldn't
Okay,
give...
so I'm sorry. Let me stop you there. So he takes your keys,
Yes.
and he takes the sheets and pillows off your bed?
I believe it was a blanket and the comforter. He wrapped himself in the comforter and had a pillow.
And would he let you leave the house?
No.
So what did you do?
I called the police.
Did the police come?
Yes, they did.
And what happened once the police arrived?
They told him to give me my keys and my cell phone, which he did, and then they left.
So what did you do at that point?
I was able to get my younger son out of the house, and we went and drove around. I became concerned that my older son was still at the house, and I wanted to go back and try to get him.
Objection, Your Honor. Non-responsive.
Sustained.
Did you go back to the house
I-
to get James?
I did.
What happened once you got back to the house?
I went upstairs, and both James and Leon came into the bedroom, excuse me, and Leon pushed me onto the bed, and he pinned my arms up and put his knees on my elbows so that I couldn't get up. And he held I call it a knife. I think it's more of a razor, like a switch razor where you push a button and the razor comes up. He held that to my throat.
Okay, so let me get a better visual picture. How old is James at this point?
It's 3.
And you're on the bed in your bedroom, and you mentioned that your arms were pinned. So I have my hands above my head. Is this about how your arms were?
Yes.
And you mentioned that he had his knees on your elbows. So did he have a knee on each elbow?
Yes.
And then with that, he put the razor to your throat?
Yes.
Was James able to see what was going on?
Yes.
And was the defendant saying anything to you as he put that razor to your throat?
He was screaming at me, but I don't remember what he was saying.
You're scared?
Yeah.
Did he eventually get off of you?
Yes, he did.
Did you call the police then?
I didn't. He had told me that was essentially,
Non-responsive.
Sustained.
What did the defendant tell you?
that if I ever called the police again, he would kill me. That was my punishment for calling the police, was being held in the bed with a knife to my throat.
So him putting that knife to your throat with James, your 3-year-old right there, that was retaliation for calling the police just a few hours earlier.
Yes.
Were you able to get away from him at that point?
I left the bedroom and I went down to the baby's room to change him.
How old was the baby at this point?
5 months old? Not quite.
Okay, so you went down to the baby's room. Where's the defendant at this point?
I believe he was still in our bedroom. That's what I recall.
What happened once you went inside your baby's room?
Leon came and closed the door and barricaded the baby and I in the room.
Where was he? Where was the defendant? Was he on the other side of the door?
He was on the other side of the door.
And how did he barricade the door?
We still had moving boxes upstairs. We had only been in the house less than 2 months, I believe, at that point. He put those in front of the door. He also took James's mattress off his bed and put that in front of the door.
Is he saying anything to you as he's barricading you in this bedroom with your son?
I don't recall.
Is he letting you leave?
No.
Does he tell you anything about how you're going to leave?
He told me the only way I was leaving the house was in a body bag.
What are you thinking at this point?
I was thinking, how do I get out of a second-story room with a 5-month-old? I thought if I was by myself, I could go out the window and maybe crawl down, but I didn't think I could make it with the baby.
How long do you think he had you barricaded in that room?
As best I can recall, maybe 30 minutes.
Did he eventually let you out?
Yes.
Was there ever a time where you got into a fight and he would take off with one of the children?
Yes, he took off with James after a fight one time.
And were you concerned about James's safety?
I was. He was driving through Pittsburgh. I tried to follow them, but I lost them.
Based on the knife to the throat, the barricading in your room, telling you that the only way you're leaving the bedroom is in a body bag, did you start to take some steps to permanently leave the defendant?
I did.
What did you do?
I went and met with a lawyer the following morning, I called my mom from her office and asked my mom to come in so that the boys and I could go leave the house and stay at a hotel.
Okay, so let's stop there. You said you called her from the office. You mean you called her from your lawyer's office?
Yes.
Up until that point, did your mom have any idea what was going on between you and the defendant?
No.
Why hadn't you shared with your mom what was going on?
Because I didn't want my parents to know what was happening to me. I knew it would destroy them. And my dad had said to me, he's going to be violent.
Without saying what was said, was your dad concerned about the defendant around you?
Yes.
When you called your mom from that lawyer's office, did you ask her to come to Pittsburgh to help you leave the defendant?
Yes.
Why did you need her to come in order to leave him?
I was afraid that if I got a hotel room with my credit card, that Leon would be able to track us.
So, is it fair to say you were so scared of him that you were afraid to even use a credit card because he could find you?
Yes.
What other steps did you take in order to leave him at this point?
We stayed in the hotel for the weekend. I called his family and told them what had happened. They came up to Pittsburgh and brought him back to Houston, so I was able to get back into the house. And I began talking to my lawyer about how I could get out of my marriage.
Did you get any kind of protective order during that time period that you were in Pittsburgh?
I did in August of 2013.
And what was the purpose of getting that protective order? What prompted you to finally take that step?
I knew that we had to get out, that I had to get the kids out. The violence was still continuing. I was afraid for my safety and theirs. Ongoing yelling. I decided that my kids were better off without being in the same household with Leon.
That brings up a good point. Describe for us what kind of dad he was, or what concerns you might have had about him parenting your two boys.
I had a lot of concerns about the drinking. I wouldn't allow the boys to get in the car with him. He was disengaged. He, even when he was doing things like putting the kids to bed, he was sitting there with his phone playing poker. He yelled a lot, even at the boys. And I remember my son would tell me things and he would ask me not to tell his dad because he didn't want his dad to get mad. And so I had concerns that the violence and the screaming and the general feeling of being unsafe was affecting my kids.
After he went to Houston, did he come back? Did he come
Yes, he did.
back? And did you make one last-ditch effort to try and make things work?
We did. I agreed to go to counseling with him.
And what happened with that?
We went to one session, and he agreed to go back to a second session. The first question from the therapist during that second session was, I don't remember the question, I just recall that Leon found it offensive, and he walked out. And that was the end of counseling.
And was that the end of your marriage?
I think our marriage was over long before then.
Did you decide or make a decision to leave Pittsburgh?
Yes, I did.
Where did you decide to go?
To Chicago, where my parents were.
Tell me about, did you take steps with your money and with your job in order to leave Pittsburgh and get safely to Chicago?
I did. In early August of 2013, I opened a bank account in my own name and did not put Leon on it, and I had my paycheck routed into that account because he had been draining our joint account, and I was afraid we would be left, the kids and I would...
Not responsive.
Sustained.
What were you afraid of?
I was afraid the kids and I would be left with no money.
Did you make a decision to let him know that you were finally leaving him?
I made a decision to let him know about the bank account.
And did that result in you, well, tell me about that. Tell me about when you told him that you were rerouting your paycheck. How did that conversation go?
The night I told him, he didn't have very much of a reaction. He was annoyed, is how I would describe it, but didn't have much of a reaction. But the next morning, I was downstairs getting the kids ready for daycare. Leon came down the stairs. He was holding a towel, and I remember he wrapped the towel around me and took my arms and my shoulders and pushed me up the stairs. And at the top of our stairs was our laundry room.
Okay, well, let me stop you there so I can make sure that we have this right. So he throws a towel kind of around you?
Counsel can sit down here.
I can rephrase, Judge. Tell me what he does exactly with the towel.
He wrapped it around my arms and my chest, not over my head, but around my arms and my chest.
And when he does that, where are your boys?
They were in the living room. At least one of them was in the living room. I believe they were both in the living room, downstairs in the living room.
Excuse me. You mentioned he pushed you up the stairs. What happened when you got to the top of the stairs?
He pushed me into our laundry room.
And what happened once you got in the laundry room?
He began screaming at me. He had his fists raised, and he was picking up laundry and whipping the laundry at me. One of the, I believe it was the dryer door was open, and he slammed the dryer door.
Is he saying anything to you during this time?
He was screaming at me, but I don't recall exactly what he was saying.
And was this because you had rerouted your paycheck?
Yes.
You mentioned he was throwing laundry at you. Did he throw anything else at you?
He threw a toolbox at me.
And how close did that toolbox come to hitting you?
Maybe a foot. I was able to duck, and it hit the wall, sort of next to me and a little bit of near my head, but did not hit me.
Did he eventually leave you alone?
He did.
What did you do?
Took the kids, brought them to daycare, and I had asked my mom to be in town.
Why did you ask your mom to be in town?
Because I was pretty sure that telling him that I rerouted my paycheck would result in him being violent, and I wanted my mom there to help me.
Did you call your mom at that point?
I went to her hotel and picked her up.
And what did the two of you do?
We went down to the courthouse in Pittsburgh, and I got there it's called a protection from abuse, I believe, an order of protection.
And did the police serve that on the defendant?
Yes.
And did that require him to leave your home?
Yes.
So once he left the home, did you go back to the home?
I did.
And why did you go back?
That was where all of our possessions were, my kids' clothes and toys and all of my possessions.
When did you make the decision to leave Pittsburgh and go to Chicago?
I believe at the time I was already looking for a job in Chicago. But when this happened, I knew that we had to leave.
Did you all come to some sort of agreement where you would drop the protective order if you could move to Chicago?
Yes.
And did you begin divorce proceedings at that time?
I didn't begin them right away because I had to be living in Illinois for a certain period of time before I was considered a resident and was able to file for divorce. But I had a lawyer and was working toward putting a filing together.
During that time period, did the defendant begin to harass you?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
He would text and call. There were days that it was hundreds of times a day. I would get text messages and phone calls, both to my parents' home phone, to my cell phone. He would call my mother. He would call my office, have my assistant looking for me. He would email me at work.
Did he ever call the police on you?
He did. I don't remember the time period, but he did call them. He would call them and tell them he needed a wellness check, and have somebody come to my house to make sure the kids and I were safe.
Why would he do that?
Usually because I would cut off his phone calls with the kids.
Why would you do that?
Because he was inappropriate. Sometimes he would get on the phone and scream at me in front of them. Sometimes he would just say inappropriate things to them, and I would cut off the phone calls.
And did that enrage him?
Sure seemed like it.
So it resulted in him calling and making welfare checks.
Yes.
Did you come to know the detectives in that area pretty well?
I did.
Okay, tell me about that.
I made several police reports throughout the time. My mom also made several police reports throughout the time. I didn't go in every day, but I would go in and show them the text messages and the phone logs so they would know how often he was contacting me.
And did you work closely with a detective by the name of Mark Feynman?
Yes.
And did he become aware of how serious the situation was?
Yes, he did.
Did the defendant not only threaten you, but did he also threaten your parents?
Yes.
What kinds of things would he say to you about your parents?
He told me that he wouldn't just come after me, that he would go after my parents, and that he would torture them in front of me.
Did he begin showing up where you were in Chicago?
Yes.
Did you get a protective order against him in Cook County in Chicago where you were?
Yes, I did.
Why did you do that?
Because he wouldn't leave me alone.
Where were you living at the time?
At my parents' house.
Would he go by your parents' house?
Yes, he would drive by, and if my car wasn't in the driveway, he would start calling me and texting me to find out where I was.
Was he supposed to be around you during that time?
No.
Did there come a time where some detectives with the police department want you to start recording some of the interactions that you were having with the defendant?
I don't believe the police asked me to record anything. I chose to record some of the phone calls.
Why?
Because they were so threatening. I wanted the police to hear the threats and know how serious it was.
Did I fly up to Chicago and meet with you about 6 to 9 months ago about this case?
Yes.
And during that time period, did you share with me some of the voice calls that you had saved from that time period with the defendant?
Yes.
And then upon coming here today, did I have you review some of those phone calls that were placed on a disc?
Yes.
And did you have an opportunity to do that?
I did.
And do those calls fairly and accurately depict the defendant and his interactions with you during that time period?
Yes.
Judge, may I approach the witness?
You may.
I'm going to show you what I pre-marked as State's Exhibit number 81. Is this the disc that I had you review prior to trial today?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, State offers State's Exhibit number 81, and I'll tender to opposing counsel for any objections.
We will object, Your Honor, and we will approach real quick. If we
Sorry, you said. You may.
Number 81.
Subject to the previous objection, it's in there.
Thank you, Judge. May I publish State's Exhibit number 81 to the jury? Now, the first thing, Ms. Morrison, that I had you take a look at was a voicemail recording. Describe for the members of the jury what they're going to be hearing here.
It's a voicemail that Leon left me, essentially threatening me.
Talk to us about what we're going to hear next.
I believe it's, again, a recording of a conversation I had with Leon where he is threatening threatening me, threatening to come to Chicago, I believe.
Why is it that you think... You just said I wouldn't live... You just said that I wouldn't live long enough to see the kids' next birthdays. Now it's my parents? I don't have you on speaker. I have you on speaker because I'm driving. Yeah. If I don't drop the supervised visits, is that what you're saying? Or what? So you're gonna kill my parents if I don't get rid of the supervised visits? I mean, you realize you're threatening physical violence, yet you want me to say, oh yeah, he can be around the kids, he's totally fine. Leon? Okay, I'm gonna hang up now.
Briefly, Your Honor.
You may.
Now, is it still Mrs. Morrison or?
Yes, that's my legal name, Morrison.
Ms. Morrison, I'm Matthew Pospisil. Just have a couple of quick questions for you. Now, I know we just listened to those recordings.
Yes.
And at the time Leon was calling you, he was still in Pittsburgh. Is that correct?
I believe there was a time, I believe, yes, all of those recordings he was in Pittsburgh. It's the best I can recall.
So he was still kind of far away. And you had taken the kids to Ohio?
To Chicago.
To Chicago, Illinois, I'm sorry.
Yes.
So he obviously was rather upset that he couldn't see his children anymore.
I don't know, he agreed to let us move.
Mm-hmm. But this was not like a court order of him not being allowed to see his children. It was just the move.
He was allowed supervised visits.
Okay. Now, one of the recordings, Leon mentions that he got sick.
Yes.
What kind of sickness?
I assumed at the time he was referring to mental illness.
Has he ever been treated before for mental illness that you know of?
Yes.
Where did he get treatment for? Or where at?
He spent several weeks at the Menninger Clinic in Houston.
And do you know if he ever got a diagnosis from them?
Yes, he did.
And was he given any kind of medication?
I believe so, but I couldn't say for sure.
And at the time he went into Menninger, what was the status of y'all's relationship? Were you done with him at that point, or were you guys still trying to work on it?
No, I was done.
You were done. Now, early on in your testimony, you mentioned that in the early stage of this relationship, you both were rather volatile. So it's safe to assume, you said it was a volatile relationship.
Yes.
Is it safe to assume that you guys both were equally fighting?
It would be safe to say when he screamed at me, I yelled back. Yes.
Okay. And you've mentioned a lot of scenarios that occurred where the violence just escalated and it kept escalating.
Yes.
But you always remained staying with him? You never wanted to leave at those times?
There were plenty of times I wanted to leave.
But you stayed with him?
I did, yes.
You never filed for divorce until a few years later?
I'm sorry, a few years later from what?
From the initial start of the escalation of violence. Like how long between the first physical alleged altercation before you filed for divorce? Was it about like 6 years?
I believe so.
And throughout this period of time, you stated earlier that you noticed the escalation in his behavior. But you wanted to have a second child with him?
Yes.
And throughout all of this time, you never reached out to the police until towards the end?
The first time I reached out to the police was approximately 9 months before we separated for good.
And that was also at the same time you decided to reach out to your parents as well?
Yes.
And at any point in time, did you think to reach out to Leon's family?
I believe I reached out to them at the same time as I reached out to my family.
Now, you've also testified that you've noticed his pattern of drinking starting to get worse and worse. He was gambling away all his money, and he wasn't home ever. Did that strike you as like a cry for help?
I didn't, at the time, did not think of it as a cry for help, no.
But you can see how that could have been one.
I'm going to object to speculation.
Sustained.
During this period of time, you probably knew Leon the best. Would you agree?
Yes.
And this random change of behavior, you didn't think to alert anybody?
I wouldn't describe it as a random change of behavior. It was a progression.
Progression. So as this behavior got progressively more severe, and you started drinking more, you started spending all the money gambling, you didn't think this was a cry for help?
asked and answered in the forum.
Sustained.
Going back to these recordings, I can't help but notice that they start mid-conversation. Is that fair?
Yes.
So we don't really know what was happening before you started recording. Is that fair to say?
I know what was happening before they started recording.
But we don't have a way of proving that, do we?
No.
How did Leon end up going to Houston to go to, I think you said it was an inpatient mental facility?
Yes.
How did that occur?
After I got the order of protection in Pittsburgh, he really wanted me to drop it because he was afraid that it would affect his medical career. And so I agreed to drop it if he would allow the children and I to move to Chicago.
And then how did he end up going to the facility?
I don't know.
Was that not part of the agreement as well?
It may have been, I just don't recall.
Did you ever reach out to his family and ask them to take him anywhere for help?
I reached out to his family in December of 2012 after he had held the knife to my throat and told them what had happened. And that's when they first came up to Pittsburgh and brought him to Houston for the first time.
And that's when he went into the inpatient program, to the best of your knowledge?
No, he didn't go into the inpatient program until I believe it was September of 2013.
Okay. So after his family came to bring him back to Houston, did you let him come back?
He came back. I didn't let him come back, but he did come back.
Did he move back into the house?
He came back into the house. I believe at the beginning he was sleeping on the couch, but he was in the house, yes.
And at the beginning he was on the couch, so he eventually moved back into the bedroom?
Yes.
And you guys shared a bed together?
Some nights, it's hard for me to recall. We had a guest room, and there were nights I slept in the guest room.
Were you guys still intimate during this time?
I don't recall.
Now, I know you guys filed for divorce in different states, is that correct?
Yes.
Who filed first? If you recall.
I believe Leon filed first. I believe he filed first.
And was it your plan to use these recordings for the custody battle?
No.
But they were available to be used for that time?
I don't recall ever speaking about them in relation to, we really didn't have a custody battle.
Now, you used to work for Fulbright, correct?
Yes.
And then you eventually went to, is it Bayer?
Yes.
Those are rather prestigious firms. Will they have you travel a lot for work? Going to different conferences?
Initially, when I joined Bayer, I traveled, but it tapered off.
So when you first began, when did you start working for Bayer? If you recall.
2010.
And when you would travel for work, would you let Leon stay with the kids?
Yes.
So you trusted him to have visitation then with his children throughout 2010 alone?
At the time, we just had one child.
Just one child?
Yes. I also had usually got babysitters to take part of the day as well.
And that's because he was still in residency, right? Or no?
At that time, yes.
But you did trust Leon to take care of the kids?
At that time.
Going back to these recordings, Leon did not know that you were recording him, did he?
I had been allowed by the judge in our divorce case.
Non-responsive, Your Honor.
Question, did you know, did Leon know that you were recording?
I don't know.
One of the quotes I heard from the recording was Leon saying, "I'm going to cut off your father's genitalia and shove it down your mother's throat." Now, that's not realistic, is it?
I'm going to object to relevance and form.
It's relevant, whether it's effective or not. So it's overruled.
I don't know. I could certainly imagine a scenario. Wasn't there a case with Bobbitt where somebody's genitalia was cut off? So I believe it's possible.
But you didn't actually take that threat as credible from Leon, did you?
I absolutely did.
You realistically thought that that's something he would do?
I realistically thought he would torture my parents in front of me.
While he was 3 states away?
He had told me multiple times I wouldn't know when or where he was coming and that we would need an army to stop him. So yes.
Pass witness, Your Honor.
I have nothing further, Judge.
Next witness.
Judge, at this time, the state rests.
Is that attorney's approach, please?
Now comes the time for the defense to present evidence in the sentencing phase. I anticipate you will hear from approximately 4 witnesses. One witness will be the court liaison officer, this young lady seated back behind that computer. She will testify that an application for probation has been sworn to by the defendant under oath and has been filed with this court. An application for probation says that you have never been, or the applicant has never been committed, has never been convicted of a felony in this state or any other state or in the United States, sworn under oath. You did not hear during the state's presentation of its case on punishment about any prior felony convictions. So it is safe to assume that there are no prior felony convictions on the part of Leon Jacob. And he has sworn to that, and it is filed with this court. Conditions of probation. They can be numerous. It is up to the discretion of Judge Wallace if this jury recommends probation to accept probation, but with certain conditions, to include jail time, to include community service, to include anger management, to include no contact, to include wearing an ankle monitor, to include curfew, to include reporting, a minimum. It could be twice a day. It could be, twice a day, reporting to a probation officer. To report to your probation officer as often as the court demands that you report. And if there is a violation of your probation, if you commit an act in violation of the probation, the probation officer can in turn request the court or the district attorney's office to file a motion to revoke that probation. And once that motion is filed, there will be a hearing held before Judge Wallace. And if he determines, based on the evidence presented, that a violation has occurred, he can revoke the probation of Leon Jacob and put him in a penitentiary. I asked this jury to listen to the testimony during the course of this case, the remainder of the testimony, and return a verdict of probation in this case for Leon Jacob. Thank you.
Thank you. Call the first witness, please.
Yes, we would call the court liaison officer.
Witness, not this line.
Would you write in?
Do you swear affirm your testimony before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Proceed, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. Would you state your name for the ladies and gentlemen of this jury?
Ashley Locke, like you lock a door.
All right. Do me a favor and pull that mic a little closer to you. Repeat your name, please.
Ashley Locke.
And Ms. Locke, how are you employed?
I am a probation officer for Harris County.
All right. And how long have you held that position?
About 12 years.
All right. Did you, prior to the 12-year period that you were a probation officer, did you serve in any capacity with law enforcement?
No.
And tell me about your educational background.
I have a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from U of H downtown. And that's it.
A BS in criminal justice from U of H downtown?
Yes, sir.
When did you get that degree?
2005.
2009?
5. Yes.
And you've been with the probation department ever since?
Yes, sir.
Now, tell me what you do as a court liaison officer.
I work as a liaison between the probation officers in the field and the court. So I process new cases, people that get probation initially. I process those cases, send them to the region for supervision.
And what do you mean by processing the cases?
I process the new conditions of probation stipulated by the judge. I review those conditions with the defendants before they leave, and then send them to the regions that they would be assigned to.
All right. So if a person receives probation, he or she reports immediately to you, correct?
Yes.
And you go over the conditions of probation.
Yes.
And certain conditions can be imposed by the court.
Yes.
There are standard conditions, are there not?
Yes, there are.
And tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what those standard conditions normally would be.
No new arrests or violations while on probation. Typically no drug or alcohol use. There are fines that are associated with being on probation. You have to provide proof of your educational skill level.
You have to work.
You have to work, maintain employment, yes. And those are pretty much the general conditions, and everything else are addition to those general conditions of probation.
All right. And the court can set certain other areas of conditions of probation, can they not?
Yes.
And would some of those be jail time?
Yes.
How much jail time, maximum amount, can the court set?
Honestly, I don't know.
Okay. How about daily reporting?
If that's something that the court wanted, then yes, absolutely, it can be added to conditions of probation.
I'm sorry, you had to speak up a little louder.
Yes, if that's something that the court has ordered, daily reporting can be added to conditions of probation.
You heard me state to the jury the possibility of an ankle monitor.
Yes.
Tell us what that means.
Ankle monitor usually just, there's usually a curfew associated with that if the judge imposes a curfew. And also to, I guess, track the areas in which he can or cannot be, or a defendant can and cannot be.
All right, now tell me about this whole issue of ankle monitor. Does the person actually wear a monitor on his or her ankle?
Yes.
And that monitor, does that connect, not physically, I can't think of the word, but does that connect directly with, for instance, a central location?
Yes. If there's a certain place he cannot be, the agency in which the GPS monitor is through are able to pinpoint those areas and say whether or not that person has been in that area that he shouldn't be.
So in other words, the court, through the probation department, can mandate that the individual stay within a certain area.
Yes.
It is not uncommon in Harris County, is it, for probationers to be confined to Harris County?
Can you repeat that?
Sure. It's not unusual in Harris County for people on probation out of Harris County to be confined to Harris County?
I guess it depends on the circumstances. There is a general condition on probation that they remain within Harris County. And so if anywhere outside of Harris County, that would be something that the judge would have to approve.
Right, and that's something that a lawyer would approach the judge on, talk to the court liaison officer about it, to see if we could get approval from the court for there to be a travel outside of Harris County, for instance.
Yes, sir.
All right. Have I talked to you about anger management classes?
No.
All right. You might, I have a way of drowning out. Pull that mic just a little bit closer to you.
Okay.
All right. Is there an anger management class?
There are anger management classes.
And what does that consist of?
Different agencies offer different things within their anger management class, so I can't speak to exactly what's entailed in the anger management, but there are classes available.
All right. And do you know how long, say, the anger management class will normally last?
No, it just depends on agency to agency. I've seen some anger management classes as few as 1 day, all the way to months at a time. I guess it depends on the agency as well as an assessment that's probably done at the agencies for anger management.
All right, so the anger management does an assessment of the individual to include taking a look at the offense report, perhaps reading the transcript of the trial and the conviction, being aware the individual is convicted, what he's convicted for, things of that fashion. Those are issues that are taken up by the anger management to determine the conditions that the individual who is involved with anger management would have to comply with, correct?
Some anger management places do it that way. Some others are just whatever their classes are or what they are. Some are longer than others. So I wouldn't be able to speak for all the anger management classes. There's always a list provided, and it's up to the defendant to pick a place on the list and go from there. So I can't say how long each class or each agency holds classes.
All right. But it would be, as a condition, I would think, that an anger management class would not be an impossible location for an individual to get to and then to come back and abide by curfew.
No, it shouldn't be an issue.
Okay. Now, if a violation occurs, you would be notified about that.
Yes.
All right.
It depends on, I guess, the violation or yes, I would.
All right. And you would then report that to the district attorney's office or go directly to the court?
To the court.
All right. And the court can conduct a hearing on that violation, can it not?
Yes.
Every violation doesn't amount to a hearing, does it?
No.
But given certain circumstances of the trial, the nature of the offense, things of that fashion, the court can make a determination to have a hearing.
Yes.
And what happens during that hearing, ma'am?
Typically during the hearing, the judge hears the allegations along with the DA and an attorney for the defendant, and the judge makes a decision on how to move forward with the case.
All right. Now, that decision can include revocation of the probation.
Yes.
And it can include the court sending the individual to the penitentiary, correct?
Yes.
I'm sorry?
Yes.
All right. Can the court also consider sending the individual, not that it has to county for a period of time?
Yes.
The court can also admonish a defendant, can it not?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Where the person would come before the judge and he would go over the allegations or the issues with the probation at the time and explained to him, what could or couldn't happen to him if he continued to not abide by the conditions of probation.
All right, and the court would take into consideration the seriousness of the violation in making that determination, correct?
Yes.
The more serious the violation, the more likelihood the individual ends up in the penitentiary.
Yes.
If I may have a moment, Judge. Have I asked? Do you have any personal knowledge as to whether or not Leon Jacob has ever before been convicted of a felony offense?
No, I do not.
Do you know that he has filed an application for probation?
Yes, I do.
And do you know whether or not that application for probation contained an affidavit signed by Leon Jacob?
No, I do not.
All right. Do you have the application for probation?
I do not have it, no.
And who has it?
The clerk.
All right. May I approach the clerk and
You may,
may I have this marked for identification?
you may.
I may approach. I'm going to show you what's been marked for identification as Defendant's Exhibit Number 11. Can you identify that for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, please?
Yes, this is a motion for community supervision.
And that appears to have been signed by the defendant in this case, correct?
Yes.
All right. If I may stand here and ask a couple of questions from this document, Judge.
Testifying about an exhibit not in evidence.
Oh, sorry. Intended the prosecution asked it to be admitted.
No objection, Judge. It's admitted. Please proceed. Certainly.
Ma'am, this application is signed under oath by Leon Jacob, is it not?
Yes.
And what date was it sworn to?
March 19th, 2018.
All right. And Mr. Jacob has sworn to a couple of things, correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Jacob has said under oath that he's never been convicted of a felony in this or any other state.
Yes.
Now, you would certainly have access to or be knowledgeable as to whether or not that's a correct statement by Mr. Jacob under oath.
Yes.
And as far as you know, that is a correct statement, right?
I don't know
Okay.
firsthand, but
Well, the state would know, would it not?
I would assume yes.
All right. Since you've been on the stand, well, I'll strike that. Your Honor, may we have an understanding that he's never before been convicted of a felony?
Let's stipulate that, Judge. Very well, thank you.
And also, Mr. Jacob is asking that he be placed on community supervision for a felony in this or any other state. Oh, has never been placed on community supervision for a felony offense in this or any other state.
Yes.
All right. And as far as you know, that's true and correct.
I don't know firsthand, but I mean, according
And
to
you've
the
heard the
paperwork.
state
Yes.
indicate that he's ever before been convicted of a felony, right?
Correct.
All right. As a witness, thank you.
Since that's part of the official record to the clerk, I assume that it will be permissible to make a copy of that for the record.
Correct, Your Honor.
And so at some point in time, we'll get the official record back to the clerk. All right, continue.
We have nothing further this witness.
Anything on the state?
No questions, Judge.
Thank you for your testimony. We'll go back to work. Your next witness, please.
Yes. Golda Jacob.
Very well.
Briefly, you are the mother of Leon.
Yes,
All right. How many children do you have?
3.
And where does Leon fall in the age category?
He's the oldest.
And is Leon's dad deceased?
He is.
Can you tell us how old Leon was when his father passed?
He was 13.
Can you tell us a little bit about what happened that day involving Leon?
Sure, it was in 1991. It was a Friday. And Leon had a cold. And so I took the other kids to school, which was about a half-hour drive each way. And his father collapsed, I guess, during the time I was gone. I wasn't there. When I arrived back home from dropping off the other kids, the fire department was there and the police were there, and they were trying to resuscitate my husband. And Leon, of course, was there.
And Leon was there before, obviously, the fire department arrived.
Leon called everybody because he was the only other person at home.
Now, what do you mean called everybody?
He called the fire department. Sorry.
Called the fire department?
Yeah, I think he called 911 and
All right.
told them that his father had collapsed, and they sent out the emergency units.
Do you know if Leon attempted to give his father mouth-to-mouth resuscitation?
That was my understanding, yes.
For what period of time, do you know?
That I don't know.
Okay.
I wasn't there.
I understand. But you have no other knowledge, no other personal knowledge as to the length of time he tried to resuscitate his father?
No, it could have been anywhere from, a few minutes to, 45 minutes. I don't know.
Do you know whether or not Leon blamed himself for his dad's death?
Speculation, Judge.
She can answer if she knows.
I think Leon was afraid that he didn't do everything right, and if he had done things better, that maybe his dad would have survived.
I think it's in evidence that Leon's been treated in a mental health facility.
That's correct.
And tell us the circumstances surrounding that.
So Leon and Annie, his wife, and their children were living in Pittsburgh. And I think Leon was having a lot of professional issues, and he was having a lot of problems. And Annie called and said, he's suicidal, he's out of control, and I need you to come and take him away, get him away. And so I flew up there with my other 2 kids, and we got Leon and brought him back to Houston, and he went to the Menninger Clinic.
Clinic.
Correct.
All right. Has he independently seen a psychiatrist?
Then or before? I'm not sure when you're asking me.
Before, or then, or after?
No. Not to my knowledge, before. After he went to when he was in the Menninger Clinic, clearly there was a psychiatrist that was treating him there. And then afterwards, he was seeing a psychologist.
Do you know how long he was in Menninger?
I think it was about 60 days.
And do you know what his diagnosis was?
I think it was a bipolar with borderline or some kind of personality disorder, something like that.
Was he depressed?
He was at that time.
Would you say very depressed? Not so
I think
depressed.
he was depressed at that time, yes.
Okay. Ms. Jacob, if this if this jury considers and assesses probation in this case, there'll be certain conditions that your son has to abide by.
Yes.
Would you tell this jury that you would do everything within your power to make certain that he abides by the conditions of probation that this court sets?
Everything in my power to make sure that he satisfies the conditions, absolutely.
Okay. Yes, this witness, thank you.
Some statements.
Ms. Jacob, where did your son, Leon, go to high school?
He went, he did 1 year at the John Cooper School in the Woodlands, and then he spent 3 years at Exeter in New Hampshire.
And what is Exeter for people that aren't familiar with it?
Exeter is a private boarding school. It's only high school. It goes from, I think, 9th grade through 12th, and it's an excellent school.
It's pretty prestigious, right?
Yes, sir.
And that's obviously something that you paid for him, and I think your other children as well, to go to that school.
My daughter also went to Exeter.
Okay.
My younger son did not.
Now, you knew Annie from the beginning of the relationship, is that right?
Well, I don't know the beginning of the relationship, but
Well,
early.
when you brought her home from college, that sort of thing?
Yes.
Okay. And you obviously had personal knowledge of them being married and them having children.
Of course.
You spent time with them whenever they could.
Yes.
When was it that you found out about your son being abusive towards her?
I really didn't know about any of those issues until I'm not going to be able to give you a year because I honestly don't remember the year. It was probably around the same time that I brought him back here to go to Menninger.
Around that same time that he came back to Houston?
Correct.
And did you learn that from speaking with Annie?
Yes.
And you said he was in Menninger for 60 days or so?
Correct.
And you said that his diagnosis was bipolar, and you think maybe some sort of personality disorder?
Correct.
What types of medication was he issued to deal with those issues?
He was on lithium.
Okay.
And I'm not aware of any other medication other than blood pressure medication that he was on at that time.
Now, how old was he when this diagnosis was made?
I want to say he was about 35, 36, somewhere in there.
So but he's been an adult for 15 years now at this point. Is that right?
Maybe, wait, let me back up.
Okay.
Maybe 37. It was probably around 4 years ago, something like that.
Maybe late
Maybe a little
30s.
longer. I'm a little fuzzy on the time frame, sorry.
No, it's okay. And this is now, speaking of him in his 35, 36, 37-year-old age range, you have done a lot in your life to bail your son out of situations, have you not?
Well, I'd say over the last several years.
Yeah. And I'm talking about going back 10 years, 10 years from now, from the time that he was at UT, then going to Pittsburgh, everything that happened up there. Have you helped your son out in situations he's found himself in?
You're going to have to be more specific.
Well, I mean, I'm asking you. I mean,
Okay.
what sort of situations have you helped him out with?
Well, I've paid for his education.
Sure.
And when they went to Ohio before they went to Pittsburgh. And, I wasn't aware of any real issues at that time.
Okay.
And then they moved to Pittsburgh, and it was only around that time that things started coming out.
Okay. And did you have any reason at the time to disbelieve what Annie was telling you?
Annie wasn't real specific with me initially about what was going on.
Okay. And maybe she wasn't, but my question really is, whatever she did say to you about her husband at the time being abusive towards her, did you have any reason to believe that she was just making that up?
That she was making it up? No.
Yes.
No, I didn't think she was making it up. I thought that was her perception. Yes.
Okay, so when she tells you that her husband's abusive towards her, you would view that as it being a matter of her perception?
Okay, well, you're going to have to be a little more specific on time. Annie did not talk about those kinds of things until we put Leon into Meniger. It was that same time.
Okay,
I didn't know about any of those kinds of issues you're
that's
raising.
what I'm referring to. I'm referring to I wasn't there, of course, so however specific she was with you about what Leon had done to her, did you have any reason to think that she was making it up?
No, I didn't, and that's why I was a proponent of getting him some help.
Did you know, or did she tell you that his aggressiveness towards her went all the way back to their college days?
No.
Now, you've actually seen your son be aggressive and violent firsthand, have you not?
I've seen him be aggressive, yes.
You wouldn't consider him pushing your husband to be a violent act?
Well, you had to be there, because what happened was...
Well, I'll object to no response, the judge.
Ask the question.
Would you characterize him pushing your husband to the point where your husband fell down, you would not characterize that as a violent act?
I didn't think that was intentional.
You didn't think Leon, in the middle of an argument, pushing your husband to the floor was an intentional act?
No.
Judge, I'm sorry.
That's what it's been. I'm sorry.
Ms. Jacob, let's go to the time where you were having an argument with Leon. This is around the period at the time when your husband was pushed, or et cetera.
Yes, sir.
You and Leon were having an argument.
Correct.
And did your husband attempt to intercede in that argument?
Yes. Leon was yelling at me, and he was sitting on an exercise ball, one of those great big balls.
Leon was.
Leon was. And my husband came over and tried to intercede, and Leon kind of slipped off the ball and pushed him. He did push him, but I don't think it was intentional, because he lost his balance on the exercise ball.
Okay. And you were a witness to that?
Yes.
Now, I may have, I just want to clarify this. Meniger is a psychiatric clinic or a psychiatric facility, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. Anything else?
And it's associated with Baylor College of Medicine.
Okay. So we'll just thank you, Phil.
Nothing further, Judge.
Thank you, Judge.
Next witness, please.
Yes, Adam Jacob.
This witness has not been sworn in, Judge.
Raise your right hand, please.
Do you swear affirm that your testimony before the board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
State your name for the ladies and gentlemen of this jury, please.
Adam Nathaniel Jacob.
And what do you do, Adam?
I'm a law clerk and a law student right now.
Okay.
I was, former to that, I was an engineer.
I'm sorry?
I was formerly an engineer before going to law school.
All right. And what type of engineer were you?
I worked in industrial control systems.
Okay. You might pull that mic a little bit or move a little bit closer to it if you don't mind. And you're presently in law school?
Yes, sir.
And where do you go to law school?
South Texas College of Law.
Okay. Do you go during the day or at night?
Both.
All right. What relationship do you bear to Leon?
He's my brother.
Older, younger?
He's my older brother.
All right. Now, Mr. Jacob, I'm going to ask you about your perception of Leon as being a candidate for probation. You and I have talked about this, have we not?
Very briefly, some time ago.
Okay. And you're aware that if an individual is eligible for probation, that means he's never before been convicted of a felony in violation of the laws of this state or any other state or the United States.
I am now.
All right. Do you think that Leon could live up to any conditions if this jury probates his sentence, that Leon could live up to the conditions that this court might set as part of his probation? In other words, reporting, wearing an ankle monitor, curfew, mental health counseling, things of that fashion.
I think it would be difficult for him, but I think he could probably live up to those things.
I'm sorry?
I think it would be difficult for him, but I think he could probably live up to those things.
Okay. I pass this witness. Thank you.
Mr. Jacob, during your life, your adult life, with the defendant as your brother, have there been times where you've had to be called on, or any other sibling, have they been called on to bail the defendant out of situations?
Define what you mean by bail him out of situations.
He's found himself in some trouble and he needs your help.
As far as advice or that sort of information, yeah, I've been called to give him some advice or, help him out.
How about financially?
No, unfortunately, I typically have not been in a situation where I could financially, help him.
Okay. What's the relationship like between your wife and the defendant?
Prior to all of this, it was very good.
And he blames Leslie a lot for what happened between him and Megan.
That's my understanding.
Well, I mean, he's pretty specific about it, isn't he, in the text messages and the things that he would say to other
I
family
haven't
members?
seen a lot of those text messages, but I've seen my wife's perspective of that, and yes, he blames her for a lot of this.
Well, that was your perspective as well, correct?
That he blamed other people? Sure.
No, that he blamed your wife specifically.
For not being able to fix his relationship with Megan?
Yeah. I mean, do you remember the text messages you sent to your brother at that time?
Really vaguely. Okay. This was more than a year ago, and...
May I approach you?
May.
Jacob, I'm just going to go to States Exhibit 82 and 83, and just tell me whether or not you recognize those messages as the ones you would have sent to your brother about that time period.
Vaguely, yes. Yes.
You go for States 82 and 83, Judge, to the defense counsel.
No objection to 82 and 83, Your Honor.
And they are admitted, thank you.
And, Mr. Jacob, the nature of these text messages is you telling the defendant to leave Megan alone, and eventually that develops into you telling the defendant to leave your wife alone, correct?
As I recall, that's...
Now, in one of these text messages, you say to your brother, Leon, your fucking girlfriend is now causing problems in my life because you will not stop harassing her and her family. Do you remember that?
Yes.
You stop this shit right now, or I will give her the fucking statement she wants of what I saw during your last argument, and she will have you thrown in jail. What were you referring to?
The two of them were in front of my parents' house, yelling and screaming at each other. My brother was quite aggressive and, I want to say, delusional about what was going on, and that probably would have been enough to have him thrown in jail at that point in time, having a family member say that.
And so you'd seen your brother be aggressive before?
Yes.
Okay. And you and Leslie have two children. You have one child from a previous relationship and a child together, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Would you have left your kids alone with Leon
When?
at the time this was happening? Around the time this was happening?
Certainly not at the time this was happening. He was completely fixated and quite delusional as to what was going on.
I don't mean that night. I mean the months leading up to this.
I don't remember anything in particular that at the moment pops out of my head, but I'm going to say probably not.
Yeah, right. Because you never actually did you?
I don't think so.
I'll pass.
No questions, Your Honor.
Your excuse, sir.
Thank you.
Your testimony. Next witness, please.
Ida Thurlow.
Do you swear or affirm that your testimony before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, from the defense, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. Would you please state your name for the ladies and gentlemen of this jury?
Yes, my name is Haida Thurlow.
And how do you spell Haida for the convenience of the court reporter?
It's almost like Heidi. It's Heida. Haida.
And where do you live, ma'am?
I live in Houston,
And how long have you lived here in Houston?
46 years.
60?
46.
46. What do you do for a living?
I run a kitchenware company, cookware, pots and pans, tea kettles, which I started 45 years ago here in Houston.
You started that company.
Yes, sir.
And the name of the company is
Chantal?
Chantel?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right. And are you still running the company?
Oh, yes.
All right. Do you know Golda Jacob?
We know each other for about 30 years, 29, 30 years.
All right. And you know Leon Jacob, do you not?
The same time, yes.
Would you consider yourself to be a longtime family friend?
Yes, absolutely.
Pardon?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Was there a particular time during your life that Leon Jacob was a big help to you?
Yes. My husband had Alzheimer, and anybody that ever has been exposed to a loved one with Alzheimer, it's a very difficult illness. And Leon was there. He was there for my husband Wayne. He was there for me. He would go out and to the care facility where ultimately Wayne ended up, and he would take him out to dinner. He would make sure he would eat. Leon was wonderful.
Would he report back to you, for instance, about taking care of your husband?
I couldn't hear the beginning of your sentence.
Yes, well, let me change it a little bit. So I take it Leon would come over and pick your husband up at your house?
Yes, but also ultimately my husband was in, it's called Autumn Leaves, a care facility, and Leon would go and see him there as well.
So your husband was staying at Autumn Leaves, which is a senior care facility, correct?
For the last year and a half, yes, but he had Alzheimer for 7 years.
And during that 7 years period, you're talking about Leon interacting with your husband to benefit your husband?
Yes.
All right.
And to help me as well, to help my family, yes.
Leon has filed an application for probation in this case. Okay? I know you don't necessarily know what that means, but basically it means that the jury, when sentencing Leon, can recommend to the court a period of probation if I think it's 10 years and or less, if that's the sentence that the jury submits, right?
Yeah.
Now, as a condition of probation, the court can set certain conditions of probation. Those are conditions that Leon has to abide by. All right?
Okay.
Now, abiding by the conditions of probation, for instance, they could mean wearing an ankle monitor. All right?
Okay.
They could mean, can you hear me very well?
Yes, I can.
Okay. They could mean reporting daily or weekly to a probation officer. All right?
Yes.
They could mean a curfew. Okay?
Okay.
They could mean anger management classes.
Okay.
There are any number of conditions that the court can assess if this jury determines that his sentence can be probated.
Okay.
Do you think that Leon Jacob would abide by those conditions? He's filed that application. Do you think that he can abide by the conditions the court has set and complete his probation?
Yes, I think so. I know that his family will be there, and so will be my family, to help him abide by these conditions.
And you would do anything you could with your family to make sure you lend support to Leon Jacob?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And are you
I think of Leon as a very kind and caring person. I have experienced his kindness and his caring.
Are you asking this jury to probate any sentence?
Object, relevance. Her opinion as to whether the defendant should get probation or not.
I think, you go ahead and answer the question.
Are you asking this jury to consider granting probation to Leon Jacob in this case?
Yes, I do.
Okay. You have anything else, any questions of me?
No.
Yes, witness, thank you.
No questions, Judge.
Thank you so much. You're free to leave. Bye. Next witness, please.
May we approach briefly?
May. Mr. Farnum, would you call your next witness, please?
Yeah, we don't.
Defense rest.
Defense rest.
Stay rest and close.
Yes, Judge.
Ladies and gentlemen, we don't know how to turn it up. But anyway, both sides have now rested and closed in punishment. It's time for me to read you the punishment charges in the case. Once we've had an opportunity to read these charges to you, it will be time for the attorneys to argue the case. I've given each side a very limited amount of time to do so. Once again, the charges are identical. So I will only read you one charge, and you'll have, of course, both charges back in the back with you to look at should you need each. So let's commence with, this will be cause number 154-3813, State of Texas versus Leon Philip Jacob, 263rd District Court, Harris County, Texas, the January term, 2018. Members of the jury, having found the defendant Leon Philip Jacob guilty of solicitation of capital murder, it becomes your duty to assess punishment in the case. Our statute provides that punishment for solicitation of capital murder shall be by confinement in the institutional division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for not less than 5 years, nor more than 99 years or life. In addition thereto, a fine not to exceed $10,000 may be assessed. Therefore, you will assess the punishment of the defendant upon said finding of guilt at confinement in the institutional division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for any term of not less than 5 years, nor more than 99 years or life, and the jury in its discretion may, if it chooses, assess a fine in any amount not to exceed $10,000. Defendant has filed a sworn motion for community supervision hearing alleging that he has never before been convicted of a felony in this state or any other state. Our statute provides that where the jury finds the defendant guilty and punishment assessed by the jury shall not exceed 10 years imprisonment in the institutional division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, the jury shall find in their verdict that the defendant has never before been convicted of a felony in this or any other state. the jury may recommend that the defendant be granted community supervision. Community supervision means the placement of a defendant by a court under a continuum of programs and sanctions with conditions imposed by the court for a specified period during which a sentence of imprisonment or confinement, imprisonment and fine, or confinement and fine is probated, and the imposition of the sentence is suspended in whole or in part. Community supervision shall be granted by the court if the jury recommends it in their verdict. If community supervision is recommended by the jury, the court may impose the following conditions, among others, with respect thereto. Conditions: 1, commit no offense against the laws of this or any other state or of the United States. 2, avoid injurious or vicious habits. 3, avoid persons or places of disreputable or harmful character. 4, report to the supervision officer as directed by the judge or supervision officer and obey all rules and regulations of the Community Supervision and Corrections Department. 5, permit the supervision officer to visit him at his home, employment, or elsewhere. 6, work faithfully at suitable employment as far as possible. 7, remain within a specified place. 8, pay the fine if one is assessed and court costs, whether a fine be assessed or not, in one or several sums, and make restitution or reparation in any sum that the judge shall determine. 9, support his dependents. A defendant who has been placed on community supervision and who subsequently violates his conditions of community supervision shall be brought before the court, and the court, after a hearing, without a jury, may either continue or revoke community supervision. And if the community supervision is revoked, the court shall proceed to dispose of the case as if there had been no community supervision not to exceed the term of years assessed by the jury. Now, having found the defendant guilty, and if the punishment assessed by you is not more than 10 years confinement in the institutional division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, and if you further find that he has never been convicted of a felony in this state or any other state, you may, in your discretion, recommend that the defendant be given community supervision. If you desire the defendant to be placed on community supervision, let your verdict show that you find that the defendant has never been convicted of a felony in this or any other state, and further show that you recommend community supervision. If you do not desire to recommend community supervision, you will not mention the matter of community supervision at all in your verdict, under the law applicable in this case. The defendant, if sentenced to a term of imprisonment, may earn time off the period of incarceration imposed through the award of good conduct time. Prison authorities may award good conduct time to a prisoner who exhibits good behavior, diligence in carrying out prison work assignments, and attempts at rehabilitation. If a prisoner engages in misconduct, prison authorities may also take away all or part of any good conduct time earned by the prisoner. It's also possible that the length of time for which the defendant will be in prison might be reduced by the award of parole. Under the law applicable in this case, if the defendant is sentenced to a term of imprisonment, he will not become eligible for parole until the actual time served equals 1/2 of the sentence imposed, or 30 years, whichever is less, without consideration of any good conduct time he may earn. Eligibility for parole does not guarantee that parole will be granted. It cannot accurately be predicted how the parole laws and good conduct time might be applied to this defendant if he is sentenced to a term of imprisonment, because the application of these laws depend on decisions made by prison and parole authorities. You may consider the existence of the parole law and good conduct time. However, you're not to consider the extent to which good conduct time may be awarded to or forfeited by this particular defendant. You are not to consider the manner in which the parole law may be applied to this particular defendant. You are instructed that the defendant may testify in his own behalf if he chooses to do so. But if he elects not to do so, that fact cannot be taken by you as a circumstance against him nor prejudice him in any way. The defendant is elected not to testify in the punishment phase of the trial, and you are instructed that you cannot and must not refer to or allude to that fact throughout your deliberations or take it into consideration for any purpose whatsoever. The burden of proof in all criminal cases rests upon the state throughout the trial and never shifts to the defendant. You're further instructed that in fixing the defendant's punishment, which you will show in your verdict, you may take into consideration all of the facts shown by the evidence admitted before you in the full trial of the case and the law as submitted to you in this charge. You're not to discuss among yourselves how long the accused would be required to serve the sentence that you impose. Such matters come within the exclusive jurisdiction of the Board of Pardons and Paroles Division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice and the Governor of the State of Texas and must not be considered by you. Your verdict must be by a unanimous vote of all members of the jury. In arriving at the amount of punishment to be assessed, it will not be proper for you to fix the same by lot, chance, any system of averages, or any other method than by a full, fair, and free exercise of the opinion of the individual jurors, and you must not refer to nor discuss any matters not in evidence before you. You are the exclusive judges of the facts proved, the credibility of the witnesses, the weight to be given their testimony, but you're bound to receive the law from the court which has now been given you. No one has any authority to communicate with you except the officer who has you in charge. During deliberations in the case, you must not consider, discuss, nor relate any matters not in evidence before you. You should not consider nor mention any personal knowledge or information you may have about any fact or person connected with the case that is not shown by the evidence. After you've reached a unanimous verdict, the foreperson will certify thereto by using the appropriate form attached to this charge, signing the same as foreperson. And following arguments of counsel, you will retire to deliberate your verdict. And this has been signed by me, Jim Wallace, Judge of the 263rd Criminal District Court. Attached to these instructions of the court's charge is a 2-page verdict sheet, a 3-page verdict sheet with various options depending on the amount of time, fine, no fine, things of that nature. Since it's a little bit voluminous, I'll allow you to read that amongst yourselves in the jury room. But whatever decision you make, be sure to make sure that it's unanimous and that your foreperson signs in the particular paragraph that you agreed upon.